Hello, my name is Christopher Coté. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee in the School of Design, and today I will be presenting my paper from archive to public encounter, publishing as experiential graphic design. Publishing is often understood as the final stage of design production, a container for content, a method of dissemination, a way to move finished work outward toward an audience. This isn't necessarily wrong or bad, but this project asks a different question. What if publishing itself could function as experiential graphic design? Not simply through immersive installations or branded environments, but through the deliberate structuring of interpretation, circulation, and encounter over time. Today I'll discuss Always Open, Issue 2, a printed and online publication that engaged with the Knoxville Metaphysical Library. I'll explain how it utilizes a framework for publishing that became a relational and experiential design process, one that I believe can be adapted and interpreted by others in entirely different contexts. Publishing is often treated as secondary within graphic design practice, something that happens after the real design work is completed. But publishing theory increasingly argues that publishing itself actively shapes meaning through selection, framing, filtering, and circulation. Michael Bakshar describes publishing as operating through filtering and amplification. Publishers do not simply distribute content, they actively structure visibility, attention, and public encounter. This project takes that idea seriously. Editorial selection becomes one of the first major design interventions. Rather than attempting to comprehensively represent an archive, the project focused on selecting materials capable of generating strong interpretive responses. Selection itself becomes a form of authorship. The archive does not automatically become public. It becomes public through acts of filtering, framing, circulation, and reinterpretation. Halsey Ellis argues that artifacts do not create publics on their own, rather publics emerge through the dispersal of those artifacts and the social relations that form around them. The distinction became central to the project. The goal is not simply making archival material visible alone. It was designing the conditions through which new encounters, interpretations, and relations could emerge around it as well. The project emerged through engagement with the Knoxville Metaphysical Library, a partially cataloged archival collection housed within the University of Tennessee libraries. The archive first entered the project through conversations with my friend John Boggs, who had begun volunteering his time to help catalog portions of the collection. What interested us was not historical verification or factual recovery. The archive resisted singular interpretation. Diagrams, newsletters, speculative systems, healing practices, occult imagery, and metaphysical visual systems coexisted alongside one another without resolving into a stable narrative. The archive became compelling not as information to decode correctly, but as a generative material capable of producing new relations, interpretations, and responses. John was often interested in tracing historical timelines and alternative histories within the material, while I kept pushing us towards transformation and circulation, asking what might happen if these materials moved into new forms and new relationships. This eventually led me to deconstruct the first issue of Always Open into a repeatable framework for interpretation, publication, and encounter. Editorial selection focused on ambiguity, symbolic richness, emotional openness, and speculative possibility. The goal was not historical accuracy. It was to identify materials within the esoteric archive capable of generating strong interpretive drift. We were also interested in suspending the kinds of snap judgments that often structure encounters with culturally unfamiliar or historic marginal material. Rather than immediately categorizing material as absurd, irrational, outdated, or historically strange, the framework attempted to create conditions where communication and imaginative engagement could occur first. Selection, therefore, became less about documentation and more about creating conditions for interpretive possibility. The project unfolds through a design sequential process titled Transmediations. Archival images are passed to writers. Their writing is then passed to artists and designers. Participants inherit fragments, they transform them, and then pass them forward. What emerges is not a singular interpretation of the archive, but a network of relations produced through transformation over time. Participants often experience the project less as a conventional commission and more as a strange creative relay or interpretive game with real creative stakes. More specifically, writers received only a single archival image with a prompt like this. Contextual information remained intentionally optional rather than authoritative. Participants could request limited bibliographic information if they wanted it, but the framework intentionally avoided positioning the archive as something requiring correct interpretation. Writers were invited to respond through real or imagined forms of writing. This shifted attention away from explanation and towards speculative encounter. Interestingly, only one writer requested archival context at all. The resulting writing was then passed to artists and designers without access to the original archive image. The second layer of separation is central to the framework. Designers are not illustrating the archive directly. They respond to another participant's interpretation of it, meaning therefore drifts across modalities where still retaining traces of earlier encounters. What emerged often surprised us. Sometimes the design separation produced fragmentation and divergence, but other times it produced unexpected forms of alignment and resonance between stages. So one sequence, for example, begins with this archival illustration titled Zalim Entering the Tomb, wherein Menin was blasted. And then this writer, Ajit Kalasa, responded with a poetic meditation on death, searching, and spiritual awakening. The text was then passed to painter Mary Lube, who produced an abstract painting titled From the Grave to the Fields. While visually distant from the original archive image, the final painting still echoes the threshold structure of the tomb opening through layered arc-like forms. What I found especially compelling about the sequence is the design separation between participants did not simply produce fragmentation. It produced a kind of unexpected alignment across stages. The image becomes transformed, but traces continue traveling through the sequence in altered form. The result is neither faithful reproduction nor complete divergence, but transformed continuity through reinterpretation. This issue of Always Open has 9 such transmediations. Each issue may take different thematic or formal directions, but transmediations functions as a consistent framework across the issues, a repeatable structure through which archival material is sequentially transformed through writing and visual response. It's important to remember that these experiences took place in isolation. The writers knew little of the archive, and the artists and designers knew nothing of the writers. These isolated experiences are then structured, framed, and designed into a printed publication and website before the participants encountered materials and the other participants fully. So this is an intentionally designed delayed encounter with the final outcomes and people. So drift is not treated as failure within the system. It is the mechanism through which new relations and meanings emerge. So each transmediation sequence unfolds across dedicated spreads that preserve the independent conditions under which the work was originally produced. The printed publication does not simply document these transformations after the fact. It reconstructs them spatially through graphic design. Readers move through the publication in the same order the framework unfolded: archival image, writing, and then visual response. But the publication becomes the first site where the complete network of transformations can be experienced in full. Each participant originally encountered only fragments of the process. The publication reconstructs these otherwise isolated acts of interpretation into a visible relational sequence. In this sense, the printed publication functions as an experiential system rather than a neutral container for content. And it's important to clarify that I've been focusing specifically on the transmediation sections of this issue because it functions as the publication's reoccurring relational framework. But each issue of Always Open may take different thematic or formal directions, but transmediations remains the consistent structure through which archival material moves through sequential interpretation, publication, and encounter. The publication itself, however, extends beyond this section. This issue also includes interviews, archival reproductions, essays, and reflective writing related to the Knoxville Metaphysical Library. What interests me is that the relational framework operates within a larger publication ecology rather than existing as an isolated art project or standalone collaboration. The project also extends beyond the printed publication through a dedicated website in collaboration with Everett Epstein. The website functions less as a replacement for print and more as an additional layer of circulation, access, and public encounter. It allows the publication to continue moving across audiences, contexts, and periods of time after the physical object itself has circulated. The version shown here is actually an earlier iteration of the site that's been live for some time, but by the time that this presentation is viewed in about a month, I hope to share a significantly expanded version in the conference chat, maybe, that more fully houses and connects materials from both issues of Always Open. So what is important to me is that the framework remains adaptable across both print and digital forms of circulation. So again, contributors never fully encounter the framework during productions. Writers do not see visual responses. Designers do not see the archive. Participants often do not know one another beforehand, but during production, relationships remain simultaneously distributed and isolated. Full visibility only emerges later through publication and circulation. Delayed encounter becomes part of the experiential structure itself because participants only fully recognize the relation to the larger system later through the publication and circulation, allowing for interpretations to develop independently before being absorbed into a broader relational framework. And then the circulation itself is designed. Circulation functions as an additional stage of design. The project intentionally prioritizes narrowcasting over mass dissemination. So the printed publications are mailed, hand-delivered, and circulated through overlapping networks of artists, educators, librarians, experimental publishers, and regional communities that we have found might be interested in this content. And then public formation emerges through that situated circulation rather than just maximum visibility of the publication. So in this sense, circulation is not simply distribution after design, it too becomes part of the experiential design process itself. And lastly, contributors eventually encounter the complete publication and one another through gatherings and shared reading experiences. The publication therefore produces publics not simply through visibility, but through designed forms of encounter and recognition over time. participants began encountering themselves and others within a larger network of transformations that was previously only made partially visible. So the final stage is just us all gathering, distributing the publication to the actual participants themselves, and then reading some of the bits and sharing. So this project that I've shared operates through what I call a framework for making others public. This is the more general framework. Much of my broader research focuses on how graphic design can create structures that elevate overlooked materials, overlooked voices, and overlooked relations through publishing, circulation, and public encounter. So rather than treating publishing primarily as dissemination, the framework approaches publishing as a relational design process capable of producing new forms of encounter and public formation. So this issue of Always Open, or this project Always Open, is just one manifestation of that larger research direction. And so this diagram here shows the specific way the framework operated within this issue of Always Open. This is it more generalized, and then this is how I used it. So what I've walked through today is one particular configuration of the framework that I've written here. So archival material moving through sequential acts of interpretation, publication, circulation, and encounter. And so what I think is valuable for this is that different archives, participant groups, institutions, or communities could adapt the framework in entirely different ways while still maintaining its relational logic. And so what interests me most is not preserving stable meaning across this process, but creating conditions where relations, interpretations, and publics can emerge through transformation over time. So the framework also reshapes how authorship operates within the publication. Meaning does not emerge from a single author or centralized interpretation. It emerges relationally across the editorial selection, writing, design, publication, circulation, and encounter. The designer structures the conditions for the transformation rather than prescribing the final desired outcomes. And the meaning emerges between participants rather than from any single participant alone. So yeah, importantly, that the framework remains intentionally open and transferable. Different communities, archives, institutions, or participant groups could adapt its structure in entirely different ways, as I mentioned before. For example, future iterations might begin with oral histories instead of images, like I chose for this issue. Different groups might participate in its selection. Different publics might emerge from that. That could be much different, but still follow the same framework. So the contribution of the framework lies not only in the publication itself, but in articulating publishing as a relational and experiential design practice capable of producing new forms of cultural encounter. So ultimately, this project argues that experiential graphic design can emerge not only through immersive installations or spatial environments, but also through the deliberate structuring of sequence, circulation, relation, and delayed encounter over time. Traditional experiential graphic design often emphasizes physical immersion or branded environments or interactive installations, but this project instead positions publication structures, sequential interpretation, and design circulation themselves as experiential mechanisms that can be designed. So publishing in this sense becomes experiential graphic design because it actively structures those meanings, relations, and how the public's born. Thank you so much.